itvt.
Chapter 18, Jackie Gleason. Quote, Jackie Gleason was perhaps the greatest comic actor ever to appear on television. He linked physical comedy to a knowledge of character with uncanny grace and timing. He radiated a specific blend of urban guile and guilelessness that is simply no longer possible in our information-saturated times. End quote. Playwright Andrew Bergman. Beginnings. The story of great television begins with his childhood so bleak that Dickens himself might have written it. Somehow, the protagonist would find, in his bleak beginnings, elements of humanity so universal that for decades he would remind millions of people of their own families. John Herbert Gleason was born in 1911 in Brooklyn. Herbert wanted to name his son after him, but Mother May said the name was way too ugly to pass on. Herbert prevailed, but May ignored him, and she called the boy Jackie from the beginning. When Jackie was 3, his 14-year-old brother Clement died. Jackie's father Herb began to drink heavily, and the marriage degenerated. Jackie soon began walking through Brooklyn in the middle of the night, beginning a lifetime of insomnia. 2 months before Jackie's 10th birthday, Herb Gleason left the family forever. The act was premeditated. He took or destroyed every family photo in which he had appeared, so May would not have a picture to give the police. Jackie never heard from his father again. Decades later, he would have J. Edgar Hoover trace the old man. The FBI found that Herb had died a few years earlier, at age 70. Gleason never said a negative word about him. His stock comment, "He was the best father I'll ever know." It was whimsical, melancholy, and classic Gleason. May tried to keep her son shut in, perhaps to keep safe the only person that she had left. Gleason rebelled, joined local gangs, played pool, and began skipping school. He smoked by age 10, hustled pool at 11, and drank bathtub gin at 12. Around this time, Jackie visited the Halsey Theater. He would say it was his first memory, seeing the Halsey and deciding to be a star. It was the very theater in which he would begin his career. When he joined a school show and got his first laugh, it was like, quote, 10 spoonfuls of cocaine. It was the greatest thing that could possibly happen to you, close quote. Gleason soon left school and began appearing in small clubs. His mother, who surely objected, was already growing ill. In April 1935, May Gleason died. Jackie was 19, and everyone was gone. After May's funeral, Gleason moved in with a fellow comedian. The timing was difficult. Gleason entered vaudeville just as it was dying. He found road work in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. When he made money, he spent it immediately, as he would do for the rest of his life. Gleason discovered that the edgier he was, the more people liked him, prompting him to dislike rehearsals and to horrify his colleagues by banning them. In the 1940s, Gleason headed to Hollywood. When he arrived, his new best friend Jack Paley, the Tin Woodsman of The Wizard of Oz, said that Gleason was the most natural performer that he'd ever seen. But Gleason got a reputation for being dangerous to work with, did not set the town on fire, and soon returned home. Back in the clubs in New York, Gleason discovered in himself the performer that audiences found funniest. He would become that person, both on and off stage. He would stay out for days, break into brilliant improvisations, then get so drunk that he would throw up on his friends. It culminated in a seminal friendship between Gleason and a New York legend. Toots Shor was the owner of an iconic New York saloon, like Rick's in Casablanca. Everyone in the time went to Toots Shor's: Joe DiMaggio, Harry Truman, Frank Sinatra, Charlie Chaplin, and Bob Hope. To amuse that rarefied crowd, Gleason began developing the characters that would define his career. Soon he was calling himself the world's greatest entertainer, though he still made far less money than his nemesis, Milton Berle. When Berle exploded on TV, Gleason went to Broadway and established himself as a star of the stage. Soon after, he returned to Hollywood and took over a role in the TV comedy Life of Riley. Riley lasted a respectable 26 weeks, but it did not have good casting. Riley was a likable, dim-witted family man, the polar opposite of Gleason. But the show led to Gleason's big break, a call from the Dumont television network. Cavalcade of Stars. It was the time of the talent raids, and Dumont had a big problem. Its show Cavalcade of Stars had lost Jack Carter to NBC. Would Jackie fill in for 2 weeks? Unlike Riley, Cavalcade was shot live, allowing the host to mix it up with the audience. It was a format as close to the clubs as Gleason could get. Gleason premiered on Cavalcade on July 8, 1950. There is no record of the show. Like much of early television, the details have been lost with time. Dumont's primary business was manufacturing TVs, and its management style reflected that. The network spent as little as possible on programming, and Gleason felt badly treated from the start. With the budget he had, Gleason made some fateful decisions, hiring Coleman Jacoby and Arnie Rosen as writers, who would help shape the characters that dominated Gleason's career. When he looked for another comedian, they suggested Art Carney, who Gleason quickly hired. Meanwhile, Gleason's marriage was falling apart. To settle out with his wife, Gleason asked Dumont for an advance of 1/2 season's pay. If Dumont would front him the money, he said, he would extend his contract for another 2 years. Dumont said no, in a terrible decision that helped bury the network forever. Gleason was furious and resolved to look elsewhere. Soon Frank Stanton got a call from an employee who had Gleason in his office. Stanton was told Gleason's ask was $50,000 a week and 39 weeks on the air. It was exorbitant, but Stanton trusted his team and approved the deal. Stanton did not meet with Gleason that day, which was just as well, because Gleason was so drunk that he could barely stand. Paley would frequently refer to having seen Gleason on Dumont and telling Stanton to sign him up. But according to Stanton, this was an outright lie. Paley didn't even know who Gleason was before they'd signed him. According to another account, Stanton briefed Paley on Gleason when Paley returned home from one of his trips. When Paley asked who the sponsor was, Stanton replied, quote, "We haven't sold him yet." Paley responded, "I suppose if we don't sell him, we can just pay him off." "No," replied Stanton, "we have to pay him even if we don't sell him." "Who was stupid enough to make that deal?" Paley thundered back. Close quote. Stanton had made the right call. Ed Sullivan would take a few more years to gather steam, and CBS needed someone who could compete with Milton Berle, the Brooklyn enemy from the clubs whom Gleason had been trying to surpass for a decade now. Gleason served out his Dumont contract for 1 more year, refining the characters that he would eventually bring to CBS. Notable skits featured the poor soul, Gleason's bittersweet portrayal of a lovable dullard who always did the right thing and was usually punished for it. Not everyone on Dumont's staff moved to CBS, but Gleason made sure Art Carney was on board. In the summer of 1952, the two men set out on a 5-week vaudeville tour. Carney would recall it as the happiest time in their relationship. They performed a number of sketches over and over and discovered that one particular sketch was loved above all. It was called The Honeymooners. The Jackie Gleason Show. The Jackie Gleason Show debuted on CBS that September. Gleason exploded onto the small screen like nothing seen before. One critic called him a gifted maniac, but he quickly became beloved by the public. Gleason's days of befriending the press at Toots Shores became a huge asset for him. Reporters relished revealing that Gleason had 3 identical wardrobes in different sizes to accommodate his dieting and binging. His breakfasts, they reported, included 5 or 6 lobsters or massive orders of Chinese takeout food. His drinking made news as well. Jackie Gleason was rock before rock, hip-hop before hip-hop. In recognition of his extraordinary live talents, he acquired a new moniker, one he said was bestowed by Lucille Ball, but which may have come from his friend Orson Welles. In either event, the name stuck, and Jackie Gleason became the Great One. Meanwhile, CBS was trying to sell the show to advertisers, and Paley was having a fit. He had learned the details of Gleason's rich deal and bore down on Stanton to find a sponsor immediately. This problem contributed to a major CBS innovation. It had begun trying to sell partial sponsorships. Instead of having to pay for an entire show, a sponsor would only pay for a portion of the show. This was a sea change in advertising, and to some extent, the commercial began as CBS scrambled to make good on its deal with the Great One. Once CBS made the change, the Gleason Show sold out in a week. On CBS, Gleason expanded his astonishing variety of characters. In 1953, the show won an Emmy for Art Carney. Ratings rose, and CBS offered Gleason $100,000 a year for the next 15 years. Soon he surpassed Milton Berle and then stole Berle's sponsor, Buick. Revenge was sweet. Gleason had come from behind to beat Jimmy Durante, Steve Allen, Mickey Rooney, and Perry Como. His only competition left was Lucille Ball, who played one character for most of her career, while Gleason played a gallery of characters each week, live, without a net. And Gleason was always in the news: celebrity biographies, stories of his excess, and a tabloid explosion when his wife confronted his new girlfriend. In the 1950s, Gleason decided to produce records of mood music, stringed arrangements of instrumentals for lovers. No record label in America would touch them, so Gleason decided to pay for it himself. Music for Lovers became the first of more than 40 Jackie Gleason albums. They would eventually sell over 120 million units, often netting Gleason $1 million a quarter. In his second season on CBS, Gleason was number 2 in the ratings behind only I Love Lucy. The Jackie Gleason show had hit its stride, and Gleason had found the formula that worked. As usual, it was not enough. In 1955, Gleason shocked the business by ending his variety show. He would do a show based on one of his sketches instead. This was universally regarded as a terrible mistake. The Honeymooners. Gleason likely moved to the Honeymooners for financial reasons. Like Lucy before him and Norman Lear after, Gleason realized that variety shows had no afterlife, while comedy shot on film could generate revenue forever. Whatever his reasons, it was a show he created almost single-handedly. The conceit and the circumstances would be the same for all 39 episodes. The show mixed live theater with the barest of elements. In an era of unprecedented American prosperity, the Cramdens would live in a tenement. There would be no phone, Gleason insisted. It would be too easy for the writers to be distracted from the 3 leads. There would be almost no sets beyond the one room in which everything happened, and nothing happened. There would be limited rehearsals to keep things fresh. Audrey Meadows and Art Carney would develop hand signals to cue Gleason when he missed his lines. There would be no refrigerator, no kids, no job changes, no changes at all, really. Just performances by one minor player, 2 outstanding actors, and one talent so raw that the human condition somehow blasted through him for 39 episodes. In some ways, it was an idol to Gleason's sad past. The Cramdens' address and bleak apartment came directly from Gleason's childhood. In other ways, it was deeply ironic. Ralph believed that money would solve his problems, but his failures were always leavened by his wife and best friend, who loved him no matter what happened. Gleason, on the other hand, had all the money he could ever spend, but never had anyone that he really trusted. What made the Honeymooners special would be debated for decades in columns, books, and scholarly papers. Gleason himself would summarize it in an interview in 1984 on 60 Minutes. Quote, "The poor soul hasn't got a hell of a lot of ability, but he keeps trying. He gets schemes. The schemes are all to make Alice happy, and he fails. And when he fails, she feels a great deal of affection. She knows why he did it." On Gleason's death in 1987, Andrew Bergman would summarize the show's impact. Quote, "It has never failed to reduce me to tears. Ralph and Alice Cramden exchanged Christmas presents in the Honeymooners version of The Gift of the Magi. Ralph has hocked his bowling ball in order to purchase a suitable gift for Alice. She, in turn, gives him a bowling ball bag." They stare at each other in that mythic Brooklyn flat. The unadorned table and chairs, the bureau, the icebox, the sink, as imprinted on our memories as the particulars of our own first homes, maybe more so. And for a moment, there is embarrassment. Ralph is broke. He has had to pawn his bowling ball. But then a beam of light appears, an epiphany, if you will, and Ralph launches into a paean to the Christmas season. "You know, Christmas is the greatest time of year," he begins, and proceeds to describe a holiday season of ringing church bells, friendly strangers, snow falling in the night. I feel myself begin to go. And eventually, the knowledge of walking home and of knowing that in that home, there's someone you're nuts about, someone you really love. and I'm gone. A grown man crying at a 1950s sitcom for the 20th time. Gleason's gut calls would make The Honeymooners perhaps the most successful single TV season of all time. Unfortunately, that would not happen for a decade. In its own time, the show was considered a complete failure. The great triumph of Gleason's career would occur during one of the saddest periods of his life. So as the show battled it out in the ratings, Gleason retreated more and more from the cast and the crew. CBS did not like the show. They wanted Gleason back in Variety, where he'd done them so much good in defeating NBC. After one season, Buick, which had left Milton Berle for Gleason, refused to sponsor The Honeymooners again. Gleason's other CBS production, Stage Show, made everything worse. NBC's Perry Como trounced it in the ratings. Yet the show had a particular triumph. Though rarely acknowledged, Jackie Gleason was the first person to put Elvis Presley on television, calling him Brando with the guitar and booking him 6 times in 8 weeks. It was poetic. Presley and producer Sam Phillips had cut rock down to its most skeletal form in their masterful Sun sessions, much as Gleason had done with The Honeymooners at almost the same time. But the failure of Stage Show in the ratings brought even more pressure for The Honeymooners to end, which it did after only 39 episodes. Another major factor contributed to the end of The Honeymooners. America had entered the age of the Western, and the industry was generally skeptical about comedy's future on television. Actress Audrey Meadows would sum it up plaintively. Whatever happened to Easterns? After The Honeymooners. The postmortems on The Honeymooners were brutal. One reviewer wrote, "It has been inconceivable to us that a comedian carrying the towering impact of Jackie Gleason should have flopped so completely as he has." In 1956, Gleason returned to his variety show without Carney or Meadows. He quickly grew tired of the workload and repetition and, once more, looked for new mountains to climb. He guest hosted on Ed Murrow's Person to Person, where his skills as an interviewer proved to be outstanding. He appeared on Anthology Playhouse 90 in William Saroyan's play The Time of Your Life, where he shocked the industry with his dramatic ability. Clark Gable, the idol he'd never met, called Gleason to tell him how great he had been. He appeared in a series of conversations with radio legend Arthur Godfrey. Again, his performances were a triumph. Columnists began to talk about Gleason as a talk show host, something Gleason tried to make happen for years. Frustrated by CBS, Gleason then returned to Broadway and had yet another triumph in Take Me Along by Eugene O'Neill. One colleague summed up the prevailing response. He wasn't a trained dancer, but he danced beautifully. He wasn't a trained singer, but he sang beautifully. Laurence Olivier, the leading actor of his time, came to the show and loved the performance. He sent Gleason a note that began, "Dear Great One." Gleason threw it away. During The Honeymooners, Gleason had been considered a has-been. Now he was ascendant, a Renaissance man. At last, Jackie Gleason would return to Hollywood. The first film he made was from a concept he created, a sweet movie called Gigot, the story of a hapless, big-hearted mute, similar to The Poor Soul, and set in Paris. Originally, Gleason's friend Orson Welles was set to direct and the great Paddy Chayefsky to write, but both eventually withdrew. The Hustler paired Gleason with Paul Newman, with Gleason as Minnesota Fats, a pool shark Gleason transformed from a mastermind into a broken man. His next movie, Requiem for a Heavyweight, cemented his reputation as a dramatic actor. He played the merciless manager of a failing fighter, Anthony Quinn, with Gleason as a cold-hearted predator. Eventually, Gleason agreed to return to CBS, but there was a catch. He would only shoot the show from Miami, so he could continue playing golf, his latest obsession. CBS would have to pay for a chartered train to bring down the cast and crew. CBS rolled its eyes and then agreed. In 1964, the train became a PR machine. Stories of Gleason's booze-filled party train of dancing girls and Dixieland bands became newspaper headlines. In the Miami period, Gleason's contempt for CBS escalated. "Any TV executive," he hooted, "must have one important attribute: Cologne. Through all the ups and downs, Gleason's final tally would be astounding. He was on CBS for 8 years in the 1950s, took a break, and then returned to do 8 more years in the 1960s. But by the end of the 60s, the world had changed too much. Gleason was a man of the 50s, and CBS had decided to target the young. Gleason was canceled by CBS in 1970. One last opportunity might have altered television history. In 1968, CBS executive Mike Dan had seen a British sitcom called Till Death Us Do Part. It featured a belligerent blue-collar worker. Dan thought Gleason might be perfect. When the part of Archie Bunker was offered to Gleason, he rejected All in the Family as a second-rate Honeymooners. Gleason appeared in a series of specials and movies over the next 17 years, including a 1983 pairing with Laurence Olivier himself. It was a nice coda for the lonely boy from Brooklyn. Gleason's legacy includes performances of the broadest humor and the deepest pathos. His ability to create poignancy with flawed characters forged the way for Archie Bunker, Andy Sipowicz, Tony Soprano, and many others. For all of his flaws, or because of them, Gleason's Ralph Cramden would transcend his time to speak for generations. No one would touch his ability to express the bittersweet for 50 years until another New York comedian named Louis C.K. Gleason died in 1987. That week, playwright Andrew Bergman would speak for millions. Quote, "The passing of this intimate stranger, this neighbor, is so astonishingly painful that one realizes the nightly cycle of the Honeymooners broadcasts, repeated endlessly, have become like mantras, half-hour prayers to the 1950s, to our lost innocence, which is to say, the innocence of early television. Jackie Gleason reassured us of our humanity like no other television clown could, because he used no visible artifice. He was pure television, pure instinct, pure talent. And away we go."